The story of the German Shepherd began quietly in a small town where everyone knew each other, and news traveled fast. The town was peaceful most of the time, and people enjoyed sitting outside their homes in the evenings. Children played on the sidewalks and neighbors greeted one another warmly. But one street was different. On that street, fear lived behind a broken wooden fence, and it had 4 legs, sharp teeth, and eyes that told a story of anger mixed with sorrow. The German Shepherd had not always been there. People remembered that a man used to live in the small house at the end of the lane. He was older, a quiet man who often walked his large dog through the park in the early mornings. The dog had looked strong, proud, and well-trained back then. Children admired it from afar, though they never touched it, and the man always kept it close by his side. One day the man disappeared. Word spread that he had passed away, and after that the house stood empty, its windows dusty, its garden full of weeds. But the dog remained. No family came to take it, and no one knew where to bring it. Slowly, the proud animal began to change. At first, neighbors tried to help. Some left bowls of food by the fence, hoping the dog would eat peacefully. It did eat, but when they lingered too long or tried to get closer, the dog's behavior shocked them. Its teeth flashed, its fur bristled, and it barked so loudly that it seemed the whole street shook. One boy once dropped a sandwich near the fence and leaned forward to see if the dog would come. In an instant, the German Shepherd charged at the barrier, snarling with such force that the boy fell backward, terrified. From then on, no one dared to get too close. Over the weeks, the dog's reputation grew. People began calling it the untouchable dog. Some even crossed to the other side of the street rather than walk near the fence. Its bark was deep and frightening, and the way it leaped at the fence made even the bravest men step back. Mail carriers refused to deliver letters to that house, afraid of losing a hand through the broken wooden slats. Mothers held their children's hands tightly whenever they passed. Fathers shook their heads, saying the dog was dangerous, perhaps even beyond saving. But behind the aggression was a different truth, though no one stopped to notice. The German Shepherd's coat, once glossy, had become dull and matted. Its ribs were faintly visible under the fur, a sign of hunger. Its eyes, if anyone dared to look past the growls, seemed not only fierce but also heavy with pain. The dog had lost its only companion, the man who once walked with it every day. Now trapped by both fences and fear, the dog was fighting against the world, not because it wanted to, but because it didn't know how else to survive. One morning, animal control officers came to the street. Their truck stopped near the empty house, and neighbors gathered to watch. The officers carried long poles with loops at the ends, nets, and thick gloves. They had been called many times before, but this time they looked determined. The dog was pacing the yard, its claws scratching against the dry earth, its eyes sharp. As soon as the officers stepped closer, the barking began. It was not the bark of a friendly dog. It was a roar, like a wild creature daring anyone to test its strength. The officers tried to throw food into the yard to distract it, but the German Shepherd snapped at the air and knocked the food aside. When one officer extended a pole over the fence, the dog leapt higher than anyone thought possible, and nearly caught the metal loop with its teeth. Gasps spread through the crowd of onlookers. Parents pulled their children back, whispering that this dog was beyond hope. After several failed tries, the officers stepped away, shaking their heads. They told the neighbors the same thing they had said before. This dog is too aggressive. We can't touch it. It doesn't want to be helped. That night the street was quiet, but the people who lived nearby could not sleep easily. They lay awake listening to the dog's lonely bark echo into the darkness. Some felt pity, some felt fear, and others felt anger. Whispers spread in kitchens and living rooms. Something had to be done before someone got hurt. Despite the fear, a few people tried small acts of kindness. An old woman left pieces of chicken near the fence, hoping to soften the dog's heart. But when she leaned down too close, the sudden growl made her stumble back. A teenage boy thought he could show courage by standing tall and staring the dog down, but when the dog barked, his bravery melted away and he ran. Every attempt ended the same way: growls, bared teeth, and people running in fear. Children made up scary stories about the dog. They told each other that it had never been touched by human hands since its owner died, that it was cursed, and that anyone who entered the yard would not return. These tales only added to the dog's legend as the untouchable one. The German Shepherd, meanwhile, continued its routine. It paced the same path day after day, barking at shadows, birds, and anyone who passed. Its world had shrunk to that small yard, where it guarded nothing but its loneliness. Though its eyes still carried traces of loyalty and longing, the world only saw its teeth. What no one knew then was that change was on the horizon. Something, or rather someone, would soon arrive who would see the dog differently. For now, though, the street belonged to fear. People kept their distance. Adults spoke of safety. Children shared rumors, and the officers prepared to return once more. But until that day came, the German Shepherd remained untouchable, a living wall of bark and fury at the end of the street, waiting for a miracle that no one believed could ever happen. The story of the German Shepherd spread through the town like wildfire. Every day, more people began talking about the untouchable dog at the end of the street. Some spoke with fear, others with frustration, and a few with sadness, but the result was always the same. The dog was seen as a danger, something to be avoided. Parents warned their children not to wander near that side of town. Shopkeepers shared stories about how the dog had scared delivery men away. Even the post office stopped sending workers to that street, and residents had to collect their mail from the main branch. The house itself became a landmark, not because of its beauty, but because of what lived inside its fence. From far away, the empty building looked abandoned, its paint peeling, the garden filled with weeds, and the windows covered in dust. Yet no one could ignore the loud, deep barking that shook the quiet evenings. The sound reached down the street and reminded everyone that the dog was still there, still waiting, still untouchable. At first, people tried to understand the animal. They said maybe it was grieving for its master, the man who had passed away. Maybe it was lonely. But as the weeks turned into months, their patience began to fade. The dog wasn't just barking. It was chasing people who dared to get too close. It ran at the fence with such force that some feared the boards would break. Children were terrified to ride their bikes near that area. One boy dropped his basketball in front of the house, and when he tried to grab it back, the dog lunged with a growl so fierce that he froze in fear until a neighbor pulled him away. Rumors began to twist the story. Some claimed the dog had bitten someone already, though no one could confirm it. Others whispered that it was a killer dog, left behind because even the man's family had been too afraid to take it. These stories added more fear to people's hearts, and before long, many were calling the local officials and demanding action. Town meetings were filled with complaints. Parents argued that the dog made their children unsafe. Elderly residents said they could no longer walk peacefully. Some even suggested the dog should be put down, as harsh as it sounded, but others felt a stab of guilt. They said it wasn't the dog's fault. It had lost its master and been left alone in a world it didn't understand. Still, they admitted they would never risk getting close enough to help. The pressure grew until the animal control officers decided to make another attempt. On a bright afternoon, their truck rolled into the street again. Neighbors stepped outside their homes, leaning on fences and whispering nervously as the officers prepared their tools. This time they carried tranquilizer darts in addition to poles and nets. It was clear they wanted to end the problem once and for all. The dog, however, was ready. The moment the officers opened the gate, the German Shepherd charged, its teeth snapping, its bark echoing like thunder. The officers tried to use their nets, but the dog dodged with surprising speed. They aimed their tranquilizer, but the dart missed and struck the dirt. Children gasped, mothers covered their mouths, and men shook their heads in disbelief. One officer stumbled backward as the dog leapt toward him, only saved by the strong wooden gate slamming shut between them. After a long struggle, the officers gave up once more. Sweating and frustrated, they told the crowd the same words as before. "This dog is too far gone. We cannot handle it. If this continues, the only option left will be to put it down." Their words spread quickly, and the people on the street began to see the situation as hopeless. That night, the neighborhood was filled with quiet discussions. Families gathered around dinner tables, speaking in low voices so their children wouldn't be frightened. "It's dangerous," some said. "Something bad will happen soon if nothing is done." Others felt sadness. "It just needs love," one woman whispered, though she admitted she had no idea how anyone could give it. The debate went on, but no answers came. The next morning, a group of parents gathered near the school bus stop. Their faces were tight with worry. They discussed writing a petition to the town officials, demanding that the dog be taken away permanently. One man said, "We can't live like this. Our kids are in danger. If no one does anything, I'll call the authorities myself and insist they act." His words echoed the feelings of many, and soon, the petition was underway. Meanwhile, the dog kept to its routine. Day after day it paced the yard, its paws leaving a worn path in the dirt. Its growls filled the air whenever anyone passed. People began avoiding that street completely, taking longer routes just to escape the sound of its barking. The house became like a haunted place, and even brave teenagers who once boasted about sneaking near it no longer dared to try. Yet beneath the anger, there was something else. If anyone had looked closely, they might have noticed that the dog's eyes still carried sorrow. At night, when the street was empty and the barking had stopped, some neighbors who lived close enough swore they could hear a different sound, a soft whine, almost like crying. But those whispers of sadness were drowned out by the louder noise of fear. As weeks passed, the pressure on the authorities grew. The petition reached the mayor's office, and soon the town was buzzing with talk that a final decision would be made. Either the dog is taken away or something must be done to end this, people said. The tension grew heavier with each passing day. Children began drawing pictures of the dog in school, some with sharp teeth and glowing red eyes, others with chains around its neck. It had become more than an animal. It was a legend, a symbol of fear for the entire neighborhood. The story of the untouchable German Shepherd traveled even beyond the town, reaching nearby communities where people shook their heads and said, "That poor place. They have a beast living in their streets." What no one realized was that the story was about to change. The dog's fate seemed sealed, and most believed only tragedy could come next. But in the middle of all this fear, in the middle of petitions, complaints, and angry debates, someone unexpected was about to appear. And that someone would see the dog not as a monster, but as a creature waiting for a gentle hand. For now, though, the town lived in fear. Parents continued to warn their children, neighbors crossed the street, and the officers planned their next move. The German Shepherd remained untouchable, pacing in its lonely prison, while the people around it braced for an ending they could not imagine changing. A few weeks later, while the town was still divided about what to do with the dog, a new family moved into the neighborhood. Their house stood only a few doors away from the abandoned place where the German Shepherd lived. The family was small, just a father, a mother, and their little daughter named Emily. Emily was only 8 years old, with curious eyes and a smile that could light up any room. She loved animals more than anything. Her parents had promised her that once they settled in, they might get her a pet. For now, she simply dreamed about it, hugging her stuffed animals at night and imagining what it would be like to have a real friend with fur and a wagging tail. The very first time Emily walked down the street, she noticed the barking. It was louder than anything she had ever heard before. Other children covered their ears or ran past quickly, but Emily stopped. She stood still and looked at the yard. Behind the old fence, she saw the big German Shepherd. Its body was strong, its coat dusty and rough, its eyes sharp and glowing with suspicion. Every other person avoided the sight, but Emily tilted her head and whispered softly, "You look lonely." Her parents pulled her away quickly, warning her never to go near that house. They told her stories they had heard from neighbors, about how dangerous the dog was, how no one could touch it, and how officers had already failed many times. Emily listened quietly, but her heart told her something different. She didn't see a monster. She saw an animal in pain. The next few days, Emily couldn't stop thinking about the dog. From her bedroom window, she could sometimes hear its barks echoing across the street. Instead of being afraid, she felt sadness. At school, other kids whispered frightening tales about the untouchable dog, but Emily didn't join them. She would simply listen and then say softly, "Maybe it's not really mean. Maybe it just misses someone." The other children laughed, saying she was too young to understand, but Emily's belief only grew stronger. One afternoon, while her parents were busy unpacking boxes, Emily decided to take a short walk. She carried a small piece of bread in her pocket. Her steps were slow as she reached the corner where the house stood. She could already hear the growl, low and steady, like thunder rumbling before a storm. The dog appeared, pacing behind the broken boards of the fence, its teeth showing as it barked at her. People across the street shouted, "Stay back! Don't go near it!" But Emily didn't run. She stayed a few feet away, her eyes calm, her body still. She knelt down on the pavement and placed the piece of bread carefully on the ground, close enough for the dog to see but far enough not to scare it. The German shepherd's barking echoed loudly at first, but then it slowed. Its eyes locked on the bread. For a moment, the world grew quiet. Neighbors held their breath, expecting the child to be attacked. But instead, the dog sniffed, lowered its head slightly, and then growled softly without moving closer. Emily didn't force it. She simply smiled and whispered, "It's okay. I'll come again." Then she stood and walked away, leaving the bread behind. That night, when the streets were empty, the dog finally crept forward and ate the bread. It was the first time in months that it had taken food without chasing someone away. The following day, Emily returned. This time she didn't bring bread. She just sat on the sidewalk across from the fence, her small legs crossed, humming a tune to herself. The dog barked at first, circling restlessly, but the sound of her soft voice seemed to confuse it. She spoke quietly, telling it about her day at school, about the drawing she had made, about how she wished she could have a dog of her own. The German shepherd tilted its head slightly, watching her with suspicious eyes, but something in its gaze had changed. There was less fury, more curiosity. The adults watching were shocked. They whispered among themselves, wondering why the dog had not attacked. Some called Emily's parents, who rushed out in fear. They scolded her gently and pulled her home, begging her never to try such a thing again. But Emily's heart was determined. She believed the dog could change, and she promised herself she would keep trying, carefully, patiently, without hurting it or forcing it. Over the next week, Emily continued her quiet visits. Each time she came, she stayed a little longer. Sometimes she brought small treats, sometimes she just sat and spoke in her soft voice. Slowly, the dog began to change. Its barking grew shorter, its growls less sharp. One afternoon, instead of charging at the fence, the German shepherd simply stood on the other side, its ears raised, its eyes fixed on the little girl. When she placed a small cracker near the fence, the dog sniffed and took a cautious step forward. It didn't snarl. Instead, it stretched its neck and grabbed the food before darting back. Emily's smile widened, but she didn't clap or shout. She just said gently, "Good boy." Neighbors who saw this couldn't believe it. They had watched adults with gloves, nets, and tranquilizers fail. Yet here was a child sitting calmly, speaking softly, and the dog was listening. Whispers spread across the town that maybe the little girl had a gift, or maybe the dog was not what they had always believed. One evening, something remarkable happened. Emily sat on the curb with a biscuit in her hand. This time, instead of tossing it, she held it out through a small gap in the fence. The German shepherd growled, but the growl was softer, uncertain. Its body shook with both fear and longing. It took a slow step, then another. Neighbors gasped, holding their breath. Finally, the dog stretched forward, teeth brushing against Emily's small hand, and gently took the biscuit without biting her. For the first time, the untouchable dog had accepted food directly from a human hand, and it was the hand of an 8-year-old girl. That night, the story spread faster than fire. People couldn't believe what they had seen. Adults who had been terrified of the dog for months now stood in awe of Emily's courage. The once feared German shepherd had begun to soften, not because of force, but because of patience, innocence, and kindness. It was only the beginning, but it marked the first step in an impossible journey. A little girl had done something no officer, no adult, no expert had been able to do. She had reached the heart of a dog that the world believed untouchable. The days that followed were filled with a kind of suspense the neighborhood had never felt before. Each time Emily walked toward the fence of the abandoned house, people peeked out from their windows, pretending not to watch, but their eyes followed her every move. Some stood on their porches, whispering to one another, wondering what would happen next. The once feared German shepherd had already taken food from the girl's hand, but no one believed the change could last. Many thought it was a moment of luck that would not repeat itself. Others worried for Emily's safety, convinced that one wrong move could bring disaster. Yet every afternoon the little girl returned with the same calm courage. The German shepherd, too, seemed different. It no longer charged the fence when she appeared. Instead, its ears lifted, its head tilted slightly, and its tail twitched with nervous energy. It would bark once or twice, but the sharp edge of anger was gone. Its growls were softer, almost uncertain, as if it were testing the waters of trust. Emily, with her gentle voice and quiet patience, gave it no reason to fear. She spoke to it about school, about her favorite books, about how she loved drawing animals. Her words were simple, but her tone carried warmth, and slowly the dog began to respond. Not with words, of course, but with its body. Its stance relaxed, its eyes softened, and sometimes when she left, it even let out a low whine as though calling her back. One bright afternoon, Emily decided it was time to take another step. She held no food this time, no treats to tempt the dog forward. Instead, she brought only herself. She approached the fence, knelt down, and extended her small hand through a narrow opening in the wooden boards. The dog barked once, startling the neighbors who were secretly watching. Gasps spread across the street, but Emily didn't flinch. She kept her hand steady, her eyes calm. "It's okay," she whispered, her voice barely louder than the wind. The German Shepherd stood still, its powerful body tense. Its ears flicked back and forth, its nose lifted to catch her scent. Slowly, it stepped closer. The growl that rumbled in its throat was not as fierce as before. It was nervous, unsure. Step by step, it came nearer until its wet nose brushed against her fingertips. For a moment, nothing happened. Then instead of snapping or biting, the dog pressed its nose firmly into her palm. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. From behind curtains and fences, neighbors stared in disbelief. For months, no one had been able to get within reach of the dog. Animal control officers had failed. Men with nets and tranquilizers had failed. Even kind neighbors with food had been chased away. Yet here was an 8-year-old child, touching the dog as though it were the most natural thing in the world. Emily smiled softly, her fingers trembling a little as she stroked the fur on the dog's head. "See, you're not bad," she whispered. The German Shepherd lowered its head, allowing her touch. Its tail gave a small wag, the first true sign of affection anyone had seen from it since its owner had passed away. News spread like lightning. By evening, everyone in the neighborhood knew what had happened. The once untouchable dog had allowed a little girl to stroke its head. Families talked about it over dinner. Children whispered about it on the playground, and even the town officials heard the incredible story. Some didn't believe it, insisting the girl had imagined it or that people had exaggerated. But those who had seen it with their own eyes swore it was true. The next day, more people gathered quietly when Emily walked toward the fence again. She carried no treats, only her steady heart. The dog barked once, then stopped, recognizing her immediately. It moved forward with less hesitation this time. Its body relaxed. Emily reached out, and once again the dog accepted her touch. This time, it leaned its head into her hand, closing its eyes for a moment as though remembering what it felt like to be loved. The crowd of neighbors gasped and whispered, some with tears in their eyes. They were witnessing something they thought impossible. An animal once labeled dangerous, hopeless, and untouchable was showing signs of trust, all because of a child's patience and kindness. Over the following days, Emily continued to visit. Each time, her bond with the dog grew stronger. She began to slide small toys through the fence, an old tennis ball, a piece of cloth she had tied into a knot. At first, the dog only sniffed them, unsure of what to do, but soon its natural instincts returned. It picked up the ball in its mouth, wagging its tail as it dropped it near the fence, waiting for Emily to throw it back. For the first time in months, the dog was playing. The transformation was not just in the dog, but in the community as well. People who once spoke only of fear now gathered to watch in awe. They saw with their own eyes that the animal was not evil or cursed. It had simply been broken by loss and loneliness. Emily's gentle heart had reminded it of trust. Adults began to whisper that perhaps the dog could be saved after all. Even the officers, when they heard about it, decided to wait before making another attempt. One Saturday afternoon, Emily's parents finally came to watch closely. They had been fearful before, but now curiosity and pride brought them to the street. They saw their daughter kneeling by the fence, stroking the dog's fur through the gaps, and their hearts swelled. The German Shepherd, once feared by all, was lying calmly on the ground beside her, its head pressed against the fence as though it wanted more of her touch. Emily turned to her parents with a smile. "See, he's not scary. He just needed a friend." Her parents exchanged a look, and though worry still lingered in their eyes, they could not deny what they were seeing. From that day, the impossible moment became a symbol. The neighborhood no longer spoke only of fear, but of hope. The story of the little girl and the German Shepherd spread beyond their street, traveling to nearby towns and schools. People came to see for themselves, amazed by the bond between a child and a dog everyone else had given up on. The German Shepherd was no longer just the untouchable dog. It was now the dog that had found trust again, thanks to the courage of a little girl. And though the journey was not over, one thing had been proven beyond doubt. Sometimes the smallest hands can reach where the strongest cannot. The story of Emily and the German Shepherd soon became the heartbeat of the town. What began as a tale of fear slowly turned into a story of hope and amazement. The neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid the barking dog now gathered in small groups, quietly waiting to see the little girl's daily visits. Each time she appeared, the dog transformed. It no longer barked wildly at strangers. Instead, it focused its eyes on Emily, its tail wagging cautiously, its growls replaced with soft whines of recognition. The impossible had truly happened. The untouchable dog had been touched not just once but again and again, and each time its walls of fear crumbled a little more. Emily's parents began to notice the change too. At first they were filled with worry, afraid that the dog might hurt their daughter. But as the days passed, they saw the truth with their own eyes. The German Shepherd had begun to trust Emily completely. It looked for her every afternoon, its eyes scanning the street until she arrived. When she knelt beside the fence and reached out her hand, the dog pressed against it as if it had known her all its life. Her parents could not deny it any longer. There was something special between their daughter and this animal, something pure and unexplainable. Soon the animal control officers returned. They had heard the incredible news but found it hard to believe. They came prepared, once again carrying their poles and nets, ready to do what they thought was necessary. But as they approached the fence, they froze. Instead of charging at them like before, the German Shepherd stayed calm, its body relaxed, its head turned toward Emily, who was already there by the fence. She placed her small hand gently on its fur, and the officers watched in disbelief. The fierce, untouchable dog they had once labeled hopeless was lying peacefully beside an 8-year-old child. The officers lowered their tools. One of them shook his head and said softly, "I've never seen anything like this." Another added, "This dog doesn't need to be put down. It needs care, and it already has someone it trusts." Their words brought relief to the neighbors who had secretly feared the dog's days were numbered. Everyone realized that the story had taken a turn no one expected. The German Shepherd was taken to a local vet clinic, but this time it wasn't dragged or forced. Emily walked beside the officers and the dog followed willingly, keeping its eyes on her the entire time. At the clinic, doctors examined it carefully. They discovered the dog wasn't truly aggressive by nature. It was suffering from hunger, illness, and deep loneliness. With medical care, proper food, and love, it could recover fully. Emily and her parents visited the dog every day at the clinic. They brought it small treats, soft words, and gentle touches. Each day its strength grew. Its fur became shinier, its eyes brighter, and its body stronger. The vet staff marveled at the transformation. "This dog is healing faster than we expected," they said, smiling at Emily. "You must be the reason why." When the time came for the German Shepherd to leave the clinic, the question arose who would take it home. Many neighbors agreed that only Emily's family could do it. After all, no one else could get close. Emily's parents looked at one another, their hearts full. They knew it was a big responsibility, but they also knew that fate had chosen their daughter to save this animal. And so, with careful thought and a little hesitation, they agreed. The German Shepherd would join their family. The day it came home was unforgettable. The once feared dog now walked proudly beside Emily, wearing a new collar and leash. Children who once ran in fear now clapped and cheered. Neighbors gathered on their porches, tears in their eyes, watching as the girl led the animal that had once been untouchable. What was once the scariest sight in the town had become the most heartwarming. Emily named the dog Shadow, because it followed her everywhere. From that day on, Shadow was no longer a beast trapped in an abandoned yard. It was a loyal companion, sleeping at Emily's bedside, running with her in the park, and waiting faithfully by the door each day when she came home from school. The bond between them was unbreakable, a friendship born out of trust, patience, and kindness. The town, too, changed because of their story. People no longer spoke of fear when they mentioned the German Shepherd. Instead, they told the story of the little girl who had done the impossible. They spoke of how innocence and love had succeeded where force and fear had failed. Families shared the lesson with their children. Never judge too quickly, for sometimes anger hides sorrow. And sometimes the most frightening walls can be broken by a gentle hand. Even the mayor of the town mentioned the story during a community event. This reminds us, he said, that kindness and patience are stronger than fear. If a little girl can change the heart of a creature we had all given up on, then perhaps we too can change the way we treat those who are lost or broken. His words were met with applause, and many people wiped tears from their eyes. Months passed, and Shadow became a beloved part of the town. People who once avoided the street now stopped to greet him, patting his head as he walked beside Emily. Children who once trembled in fear now laughed and played fetch with him at the park. The very dog that had been called untouchable was now the most loved animal in the community. Emily, too, grew stronger and wiser. She often told her friends Shadow wasn't bad. He was just sad. Sometimes we need to listen with our hearts, not just our eyes. Her simple words carried a lesson even adults held close. The once abandoned house no longer echoed with lonely barks. It stood quiet, a reminder of the past while Shadow's new life unfolded in a home filled with love. Every evening, Emily would sit beside her dog, stroking its fur, whispering secrets only he could hear. In return, Shadow would rest his head in her lap, eyes closed, finally at peace. The miracle was not just that a little girl had touched a dog no one else could. The miracle was that she had changed an entire town's way of seeing. Fear had turned to compassion, suspicion to trust, and hopelessness to joy, and all because one child had looked past the growls and teeth to see the sorrow in a dog's eyes. The story of Emily and Shadow lived on in the town for years. Parents retold it to their children, teachers shared it in classrooms, and neighbors passed it down as a local legend. It became more than just the tale of a dog and a girl. It became a reminder that the simplest acts of kindness can bring light into the darkest places. The German shepherd, once known as untouchable, had found love again. And the little girl who believed in the impossible proved to the world that sometimes the bravest hearts belong to the smallest people.